Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the Helping People Perform podcast. Delighted to be joined today by John Monks, co-founder at Curve and author of the book Closer Apart. So John, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's brilliant to be here, and what a great way to start the year.
Exactly, yeah. We're just into the new year. Everyone's coming back, loads of energy going back in, and it's fantastic to have you on board. So before we learn a bit more about what you do and what you do at Curve and how you help people, can you give us a little bit of background about you and your history, how you've got to where you are today?
Yeah, I'd love to. So one of the reasons I'm super excited to be on this podcast in particular is the way, exactly what you say, helping people perform. And when I was thinking about this before today, I was like, oh, actually, helping people perform is probably like the golden thread that runs through, like maybe even my whole life. Actually, I think I was doing it before I actually entered, work in inverted commas, because I love to. I love to help people. I always think people can do a lot more than they believe that they can. And so the destination, which I'll get to in a minute, of becoming a coach was, in retrospect, really obvious. Right? Not obvious at the start of the journey. So I've always been in this helping other people, and that's taken a few different forms over time. So right back at the start of my career, I kind of started off in consulting. At the start, that was in it's always been kind of at the kind of awkward, crunchy interface between people and technology when people are having to change and do something a bit different that they haven't done before. And I'm not a techie, but I do like new stuff. Yeah. I'm always drawn to that bit of how do you help people get through the painful bit to be able to do something that they probably think is impossible. So at the start, that was like great big tech rollout around the millennium. Yeah. Then I spent a few years working in public sector change.
Nice.
Some part of that in a consultancy, part setting up Curve for the first time. And the first time round, Curve was a change consultancy working specifically in public sector. And the most exciting bit of that for me was setting that up in New York. And there in New York, I was working with the police and fire department. So it was it was years later, but it was a program that was a result of 9/11's.
Wow.
Learning, I guess. So there were a lot of extraordinarily painful learning, obviously, that came out of that. A lot about how those two agencies work together, which in a nutshell was they never did. They didn't want to. And they needed to. And it was really clear from that. So it was an amazing, amazing opportunity to both see inside organizations with immensely strong cultures that were immensely useful to them. Because life and death, needing to, literally have one's back, go into burning buildings, quite literally. A lot of the metaphors that we use later today, they were literally doing that. So to see that and to see how that can be a force to do amazing stuff, and it can also be a huge anchor that stops change.
Right.
So how do you work with people in situations like that to enable them to change? So super interesting. And for one reason or another, the Curve the first time round, the three partners went off in our different directions, and I, in a kind of random turn, I went into digital marketing. So I set up a consultancy offering for the clients of the marketing company. So these are great big brands. It was a big global marketing agency. And we were working with those brands, helping them to come to terms with digital. Right. Again, like massive technology change. They didn't really know what to do with it. Their agencies were great, but they couldn't quite shift internally. So that was, I got to see the kind of madman culture, which did not, at that point, I don't drink anymore. At that point, I quite like to drink, but that was like really taking it too far. But one of the things I learned there was the power of communication to change behavior. So like if that's what marketing is, it's using communication to change behavior. And through consulting, as you know, you're holding people's hands or showing them what to do. but this was telling them a story. I was like, that is so interesting. So it added two parts to how people change. They change because they've got a teacher or a coach,
Yep.
and they change because they hear a great story that inspires them.
Mm.
So it was a really, really wonderful serendipity that those two things came together. Wasn't to be forever. Culture didn't quite fit me. I learned a huge amount. I also love to work for myself. I love to have my own company. So I set up Curve again, second time round. This time we're a creative leadership company. And what we do is we work with individuals, teams, and organizations to do what they believe to be impossible.
Right.
So you can see from the people, teams, and organizations why I'm so delighted to speak to you, Paul, because I know that's how you talk about your work.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. I mean, amazingly varied and interesting history. And I've had the same. In fact, it was the sort of start of this podcast for me was looking back and reflecting on my career, in that I've had jobs such as production manager in a sausage factory. I've been a consultant in food manufacture. I've helped people internally in big dairy companies. I've worked in banking, but all of those roles had that connection on reflection of helping others and helping people to be at their best. And that really got me interested in doing this for myself, but also finding out more from others. And it's great to hear those different histories and different experiences.
Isn't it interesting how, just what you say there of like how clear your story and your journey can be in the rearview mirror.
Yes.
I like that. It's like, oh, that's how this all fits together. It's like, it's really obvious, but at the time these things can feel quite random. And I think for people that we work with, that's actually quite nice. Like sometimes things can feel random in the moment.
Yeah.
And yet actually there's something deeper that's driving it.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. And there's a couple of things I'd like to just delve into a little bit more in that history, because one of the things that came to mind, and this is probably the result of that cultural imagery and the immersion in media of, I think of the likes of Brooklyn Nine-Nine and other comedy shows, but cop shows and things, and they take the mick out of that relationship between NYPD and the fire department, and it's like, what's the difference between a cop and a fireman? A cop wants to be a fireman. That's essentially the difference, isn't it? Everyone wants to be the fireman, but that cultural almost butting of heads, and has been for many, many years. How was that experience, and how did you start to chip away at that? And
yeah, I mean, I think it was for me super fascinating because I'd worked with the police in the UK. The policing culture in the US is very, very different.
Right.
Could have a whole podcast episode on that, but what was fascinating there was that you've got these two super powerful organizations in New York. They're big institutions. They're politically active, so they've got a history of like being able to kind of call their own shots. Yeah. And obviously they're both like loved by the general public in their different ways. And especially fire is still like a family outfit. Like, right. There are generations of people who work and have always worked there. Less so in police, that was the case, but for various intricate reasons, it has become less so in the last few decades. So one statistic that makes me well up every time I say it, but in fire department, 3,000 people work there, and in 9/11, more than 300 people died. So 10% of the whole organization gone in one day, less than one day. And that in an organization where, this is brothers, cousins, mothers, father, like, literally a family business.
Yeah.
Family organization. It really makes me tingle because it was an insight into like what grief, literal trauma and grief means in an organization and what that then happens. So the background to like why police and fire have always been kind of that, had that animosity or tension between them, like, is a really long story. There's a funny scene in the film Gangs of New York. I don't know if you've ever seen that film.
Yes, yeah.
Where it's like right back at the starting, when it was like the frontier of, and it was kind of lawless, and fire and police were basically rival gangs.
Yes.
It's like, oh, there's probably a little bit of truth somewhere there. That generations later is there, but I think it's become a story. Like that's become the myth that is also the reality. to the point of, the baseball matches that they have every year always result in people being hospitalized, like literally
Wow.
every year. So like it is a reality. And the thing that I thought was really interesting was, from this side of the Atlantic, when we saw the horror of 9/11, we kind of looked at the kind of shoulder to shoulder brothers in arms narrative of them going together into the ground zero site and risking everything. And that was super strong. Like, in that moment, they were, I think, very much shoulder to shoulder. And I'm sure that for some time after that, there was a golden opportunity to really make, silver lining of the most awful cloud to try and, move things forward into a better direction. But what actually happened was it took an awfully long time. It became quite political. It was, many, many years later that they tried to make any meaningful change. That, for years they were just talking about, radio systems.
Right.
And in that time, the cultures had kind of gone back to where they were. The old stories had resurfaced. The memories of, that bond, I think, had faded.
Yeah.
And then it had got back into really being kind of quite territorial about what was theirs, which was which. And a great example for me was like my client was both. Like I was, running a program that was equally delivering to both agencies, and I had to have an office in both police and fire headquarters.
Right.
And I had to be there for literally the exact same amount of time. So, and if they felt I was spending more time on one than the other, then I would get called up and say, like, where were you? What were you doing? I spent a lot of time on the Manhattan Bridge because
going from one to the other.
The headquarters are all one edge, one foot of the other. So super interesting story. And I learned such a lot from that. And what it shows to all of us is like, you've got things that you think might drive change that maybe wouldn't, and you've got opportunities that any situation change can happen. Like it's all it requires is some person, some people to change their mind. That happens like that. Right. People change their mind in an instant, and that for me is at the heart of all organizational change. Like people say change is hard, and it can be, and at the end of the day it's only ever the split second of changing your mind.
Oh, amazing story. I would talk about that for ages. And I had a similar experience, shall we say, but at a much much more concise and controlled piece. But it was in the sausage making days where somebody in the factory died on site. But it was very much a family factory. They were, and the person who died, unfortunately, was in my team. One of the team leaders who worked for me, it was his wife. There were children, there were aunties and uncles, and everyone working there, and just dealing with actual grief and dealing with that family connection. As a 24-year-old, I think it was, wet behind the ears manager, how do you deal with that? But also the journey of how do you get back to work? At some point you have to, you can say as an organisation, we're going to hold off and give everybody their time, but at some point you're going to have to get back to work. And I can imagine with the police and the fire department, fires don't stop just because there's one big one over there. It doesn't mean that there aren't other family fires elsewhere. You've literally got to get back straight on. So, an amazing topic, and let's save that for a deeper dive another day maybe. But the other bit I was just going to touch upon as well was that side shift, as you sort of indicated, into that digital media world. Just around, what was that? Was that an opportunity that came your way? Was it something you were seeking deliberately to move to the side?
No. Yeah, it wasn't. When I knew I wanted to move, so right. As I said, curve had changed. I didn't wind it down till I find something different. But it kind of, I missed the fact that I trained as a coach. So at some point in that, I trained as a coach while I was at the digital marketing company. I loved that. I wasn't practicing as a coach, but I was starting to do bits and pieces of private practice just because I love it. Actually, I really enjoy it. So that kind of fork in the road was speaking to somebody working in a big, in the place that later became my employer, and they were saying, yeah, well, we've got these clients and they're huge organizations and they've always got this problem with internal change. And it sounds something like you might know about that. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what I do. It's like, yeah, great. Well, we kind of want to help our clients. Like, okay, let's talk.
Yeah.
So it was a natural thing for their clients to need help. It turns out, interestingly, though, that the ad industry and the consultancy industry, like, they are very different business models. Like, they work in very different ways. So most buyers of ads, digital or otherwise, don't really want consultancy from their ad agency. They just want a brilliant idea, a beautiful website, a great campaign, and they don't want them in the building collaborating very much.
Yeah.
That actually, it was a very hard sell a lot of the time, even though it was clear that they needed it.
Right. Oh, well, maybe that's a bit of a segue there into Curve and what you do now, because I know the word collaboration comes up massively in terms of what you do. So could you tell us a bit more about Curve, what you do, and who do you help and how do you help them?
Yep. So we, as I said before, we help individuals in teams and organizations. We do that through facilitation, so running workshops, training people, so upskilling them, and coaching teams. So we coach teams, we coach individuals in the context of teams, not on their own. So we're a team coaching business rather than an individual coaching business. The kinds of clients we work with seem to fall into two groups. So we work with quite a lot of big kind of global corporates or big UK organizations. And then we seem to have found a very, very lovely niche in kind of fast growing tech startups.
Right.
So typically they're in there like 50 to 150 people. They've got funding, they've got a brilliant idea, great product, and they're suddenly having to grow up is normally how they describe it.
Right.
And that is a super interesting space. So what we've got is two types of client that often have the exact opposite problem. So those tech startups is like, we move so quick, we can turn on a dime, we can make all these decisions, but like, we keep changing our mind. There's no consistency. New joiners don't know what they're doing. Help. And then on the other side of the coin, you've got these decades or hundreds of year old, thousands of people organizations with super rigid processes and super tied up ways of working and super embedded cultures who desperately want to move quicker, have new ideas, break down their silos, change their minds. Help.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting because it is, the core of it is still they need to collaborate in different ways.
Yeah.
But they've got two very different challenges.
No, it's I'm smiling a lot because I've experienced both ends of the spectrum myself as well, and it's that piece of, are you using process? Is process actually swamping you in such a way that you've got so much you can't have any creativity, or it stifles that creativity, that stifles that ability to move quickly. Or I've worked with some smaller companies who are going, we'd love to grow, but we're going to spend so much time training new people because we have to have the people who do it right now training them because we haven't got anything documented, we don't have any processes written down. So it's an interesting balance, isn't it? And
it is a challenge, isn't it? And what we do, so obviously the team coaching can kind of go wherever it needs to go. The collaboration for me, we've got leadership programs and we've got training. Largely this is online, like as we'll speak about in a moment, no doubt. It's a part of the book that I wrote with Lizzie, all about collaborating online.
Right.
And I genuinely believe that almost everything, if not everything, can be done better online than in person.
Right.
That's still a controversial point of view. I understand why, because I love people and I love to be with people as well.
Yeah.
But training for sure is better delivered online, much more flexible. People learn much more. You can deal with distractions. It's possible to do like all of those things.
Yeah.
So we spend a lot of time. And for me, my personal kind of the skills we train the most that I enjoy working with people the most is feedback and growth mindset.
Right.
So for me, these are the two topics. They're both big topics but people learn it pretty easily, because it's quite intuitive often.
Yep.
But yet it holds the key to massive transformation. So the ability to give and receive feedback and take and learn from that, like that, the best organizations do that really well. And that is 1% of organizations I see. It is so rare, but everybody can do it. And the other one, which I love, is this idea of growth mindset, which is from this book by Carol Dweck, which is all about, it's the heart of coaching, really, isn't it? It's always you're always learning and growing. For me, my favorite word from all of it is if you take any sentence and put yet on the end of it. So it's like, I can't play the piano yet. So, again, it's such a simple concept that people can get quite intuitively. So the content is, can be very, very simple. And then in this combination of training and our training is, we never do PowerPoint. It's always in a workshop format. So it's a combination of training and coaching in a workshop format can change people very quickly. So I really, really love that kind of intersection of teacher and coach.
Oh, brilliant. I'm smiling to myself here because that piece of I can't do it yet is something that I've been deliberately trying out with my 9-year-old. And it's amazing that on reflection, when you think about those things, like why am I not doing this for myself? Why am I not doing it enough for myself? Maybe it's
completely. And my kids are 16 and 18, and when I do that, they're like,
you coach me again, Dad. Oh yeah, it's a difficult line to manage, isn't it? That am I being a parent? Am I moving into that coaching piece? And
we haven't done it. We haven't cracked it yet.
So tell us a little bit about Closer Apart, and the book that you wrote there and co-authored.
Yeah, so obviously we've been working in collaboration, running workshops for years. Some of them have been online, but the vast majority weren't. People didn't really want it prior to 2020. Didn't think it could work, didn't have the technology, IT says no, like all of that stuff. We'd created a course on how to facilitate online for an environmental consultancy that wanted to reduce its travel. And they never bought it.
Right.
Crazy. Anyway, come start of 2020, once we've always been a fully remote organization, so it was easy for us to pivot. Suddenly everybody was like, we need this, we need this, we need this. So we were delivering it like non-stop from the start of lockdown I literally feel like I did nothing but deliver that course. It's a 2-hour course that was like every single day. Wow. For months. I was like really in that content, seeing how brilliant that, how many light bulb moments people would have. It's like, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do this. Oh, it's possible. And so again, very simple things, nothing that anybody needed something. Didn't need £1 million video conferencing. You could use free software. So there came a point in that where I realized we could do this every hour of every day and not even scratch the surface of the need that was out there in the billions of people who were suddenly thrust online. So the question was like, okay, how do we create something that is more scalable? And the obvious thing for me was, well, we'll take the content that we already have and we'll write that into a book, which is all about how to design it and facilitate great collaboration and workshops online. So it's there to be a coach. We want it to feel like a workshop. So it was a really brilliant, the designer is fantastic, and my business partner Lizzie, who led that part and did the illustrations, which are beautiful. Like, it's a real experience, I believe, and people tell us to read the book. And it should be giving you some help, some confidence, some curiosity to create for yourself, and that turned out to be true. And in the first week, it was number 2 Amazon bestseller, and that was like, oh, people do want this. So that was really, really amazing. And there's a course that goes with it. So after that, then we created a self-paced e-learning course that exists as well. So we've taken that. We now Yes, as I say, most of our training is still online, even though last year, 2022, was for sure the year of the offsite. So we had run so many offsites. People really wanted to be back together, and I completely agree with that. So it's been a really interesting journey of like taking something, there's still more to learn. It's still an evolving practice. And yet, unfortunately, in many organizations, they're deliberately or accidentally stepping backwards, and they're going into the very difficult space of hybrid.
Yep.
It's like this, like, how are we going to do a bit of this and a bit of that? And it's like, ends up being bad for everyone. So we're just actually about to re-release the book with an additional chapter on hybrid to give people some tips, even though my main message is still it's better online.
Right. Interesting. And I've wrote that down actually, and it's most of the conversations I've had with others in this space have been it can be as good online as in person. And you're the first, I think, who've talked to me and said it can be and is better online.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it is just because the vast majority of people have never experienced a decent online workshop.
Yeah.
They because nobody's been told how to do it. I mean, it's not hard. And what's interesting is, especially in big companies, the technical barriers that were there often was like, no, we can't do Zoom. IT doesn't allow it. No, we can't do breakout rooms. IT doesn't allow it. All that's gone away now. There's not an organization in the world, I don't think, that doesn't have video conferencing platform with breakout rooms.
Yeah.
So everybody has what they need, but all they need now is a little bit more. It's a bit of skill. It's not a huge amount of skill, but it's mainly confidence. And that's what we want the book to give people.
Oh, nice. Oh, we'll definitely put links in there for people to go and get that. And roughly, what time frame are we talking for the release with the?
I'm hoping to get that into kind of design in the next couple of weeks. So February. I wanted January, but I think I'm always optimistic. When I speak to the copywriter and designer, they'll be like, nah.
Fantastic.
Well, look, it's Amazon print on demand, so it's like once it's done, it's done. It's brilliant.
Yeah. Brilliant. So let's keep an eye out for that one. I know it's a challenge that I've talked to a lot of clients about, and a lot of my friends and colleagues have talked about. Particularly the hybrid side. Doing something online is a challenge in itself, but hybrid's a whole new ball game in that space. Oh, brilliant stuff! And let's change this conversation slightly to think about you and how you help your own performance. Who do you go to? What do you do? How does John up his own game?
Yeah, well, it's such a brilliant question, and I think my instant reaction was like, oh, I wonder what I do. I don't, and then I sit down and like, actually, it's kind of a lifelong project actually of self-reflection and self-improvement. Even though I might not necessarily have given myself that many stars, I do spend a lot of time thinking about it. I was thinking when preparing for this, what's the main thing? And I think the main thing for me is journaling. So it's my place of self-reflection. It's my place of self-coaching, and it's where I work out. It's obviously going on in my head, but it's the point at which I can see the words reflected back on me. It's like, oh, I need a bit of help with this, or I need a bit of help with that. So I think that's my foundational practice. And I've got an article or two about it on LinkedIn, so if people want to read about it, because I'm a huge advocate of journaling. Again, it's something that everybody can do, literally nothing that anybody doesn't have, and yet it's some minority of people that try it, and there's lots of reasons why people think they can't do it, and it's only a yet.
Yes, exactly.
It's only a yet. So everybody I think can really benefit from that. I love it, and from that I find from time to time I have a coach myself. So I've had a really brilliant coach called Robbie, who's got a brilliant podcast called The Coach's Journey that your listeners might want to listen to. So he coached me in the last year. I have coaching supervision. I read a lot of books. I listen to lots of podcasts. So lots of that. But a great example, I think, of like how the journaling has helped me grow as a person was this time last year, almost exactly to the day, I decided I'd like to make this year a year of understanding my own energy. Right. So I kind of chunked the year up into 4 bits and said, well, first quarter, I'm going to think about sleep. Second quarter, I'm going to think about exercise. Third quarter, I'm going to think about food. And then the fourth quarter, I'll think about emotional energy. And then each of those, I'd kind of played around, I journaled, and I do some very basic like self-measurement. So I'm not a geek and I'm not a data person, but I do quite like measuring a few things. So I put a little box at the bottom of my daily journal, which was like, what did I eat? What did I drink? How much did I sleep? Or whatever the thing was I was tracking for that quarter. And so I've got my green juice here. It's become a staple. I've got little practices. I've changed the way that I go to bed. I've shifted what I eat. I've changed how I exercise. In that year, my average daily sleep went up a whole hour, from January to December. That's massive. And I would say most people who know me would say I struggle with sleep, but that was a yet then.
Right.
Now I don't really struggle with sleep. And so that I think the key for me, and I guess my tip for all of your listeners is like, how do you work out where you want to help and what the best way for help is? For me, that how I work out where is the journaling. And from that, then you can say, oh, well, maybe I need a therapist, or maybe I need a coach, or maybe I need an online yoga session, or maybe drink some more water, or whatever the thing is, because there's infinite possibility.
Yeah.
But the key is working out what's the thing to do.
No, it's a really interesting piece and an interesting reflection for myself as well on this, in that quite often people will go to, there's a new shiny solution. It might be the green juice. It's like, right, I'm going to try the green juice and see if that works. Whereas your approach that you're talking about there is, I'm going to set out what I want to achieve. Then I'm going to try some experiments and understand where I need to focus more effort, or to the things that don't necessarily work for me.
Oh, for sure.
And move that away. So love that approach, and love that approach of, by the way, of setting yourself out a target for the year and breaking it into quarters and themes, because that makes it a little bit more achievable. And I'm sure within those quarters you would have sort of slightly broken down goals or views or topics within that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, for me, one of the things, especially speaking at the start of a year, often people put like a lot of pressure and like a lot of kind of quite specific targets and goals and things, and which really is setting out to fail. I'm not a believer in New Year's resolutions. I'm not a believer in big goals that you set yourself on New Year's Day, and I'm going to lose this much weight, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to stop drinking, all the things that people do. And I think that to be able to lift out of that and say, well, for me, the word is always an intention.
Right.
So my intention was to focus on my energy and just get it a bit better. But I had to work out what that even meant to start with. But at that level of altitude, you can't fail really, because even if all I'd done was on one day, have a think about it, I'd still have met that intention. So I think there's something really great to, get to something that feels quite meaningful, but also really kind of open, because that's just a brilliant place to start.
And is there a new intention at the start of 23?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. No, not yet. I'll put the link to this as well, because it's one of my favourite resources. It's a free resource called the Year Compass.
Yeah.
And I think it's a social enterprise, and they do this every year. But it's a free downloadable PDF.
Wow.
You can print it out. You can do it online, and it's a structure of questions that you kind of journal off the back of.
Right.
In two parts. One part looks back at the year that's just gone, which is a really lovely thing to do, because you've generally forgotten most of it.
Yeah.
And then a lot of it looks forward. So it's a kind of coaching in a PDF.
Yeah.
I did the looking back, and I really enjoyed doing that. And I haven't found the time, or there's some resistance to doing the looking forward bit yet.
And couple of shorter questions now then. In terms of, if you had the opportunity to work with any individual team or organisation to help them perform with the skill set and the experience that you've got, who might you want that to be?
So for me here in the UK, it's the NHS.
Right.
I just, I feel, again, it's a little bit like that in YPDFDY, this is life and death. But it's at a national scale, and it's critical to every single person. And it's both, it's clear whenever you interact with it, it's just like so organizationally broken in so many ways. And yet at the same time, it's constantly being changed.
Yeah.
And I feel like an approach that wasn't just yet another top-down reorg would be a really, really interesting thing to do, something which acknowledged that they will obviously know the answers to their own problems. They obviously have the resources. They may no doubt need some more money, and yet, spending time working with those people doing that incredible work would be amazing.
Oh, fully agree. I haven't had the opportunity yet to work with the NHS. There's actually potentially some things in the pipeline for me, so I'm hoping to get that opportunity myself. And conversely, if you were able to sit down, have a cup of coffee, have a chat with, in order to help your performance, someone that you think you could really learn from and be inspired by, who would you want that to be?
Yeah, this again, such a great question. It's like, oh my goodness, so many people. The one that really came to mind though was Brené Brown, and I'm sure loads of people would say this, but because of her, she's just such a not forceful, but energetic communicator, and her work around vulnerability and being able to work with your emotions, which is an area that, like, I'd said that was my Q4 of last year. Like, I couldn't work out what to do in that. Actually, I still haven't worked that out. So she'd probably be able to help.
Nice.
But also, like, I really get the sense. I love her podcast. I love listening to her books because she reads them herself. And I really get the sense she's very, very different to me. Like, actually, we've got a hugely different way of thinking, way of working. So I feel like A, I love what she's doing, and B, I would love to get inside her brain a bit more.
Yeah, wonderful. So if any of our listeners, in fact, if Brené's listening right now, or if there are any listeners there, maybe we can start putting some people in touch with each other as well. And where can people find out more, John? How do we find out more about Curve, Closer Apart, those sorts of things?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, John Monk's Curve. That's easy to find. Curve, we are curve.cc. So we've got a website. All of the stuff we provide is on there. And Closer Apart is closerapartbook, all one word, .com.
Brilliant. And all of those links will certainly be in, and we'll share all of that with everybody. Just a massive thanks for joining me today, John. Really interesting chat, and hope this year goes well for you.
Thank you very much. You too, Paul.
Cheers, John. Bye now. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review, and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.